Some people are calling it the real Game of Thrones. Saudi Arabia's King Salman has named his 31-year-old son, Mohammed bin Salman, as first in line to the throne at the expense of his older cousin. The question is whether the new heir will kickstart the economy of the world's biggest oil producer or drive the whole region off a cliff. He's widely credited for sweeping reforms to reduce the kingdom's reliance on oil. But as Defence Minister, Mohammed bin Salman has taken Saudi Arabia to war in Yemen and into a diplomatic crisis with neighbouring Qatar. Well, joining us from Beirut is Ben Hubbard, Middle East correspondent for New York Times. So good evening to you, Ben. Were you surprised by this?
Well, it's one of these things that's surprising and not surprising. I don't think that many people who follow Saudi Arabia are very surprised that it actually happened, but the timing itself was surprising. I mean, since Mohammed bin Salman, the new crown prince of Saudi Arabia, came onto the scene in early 2015, before that, very few people had ever heard of him. His father became king and then started giving him new positions. And since then, it's been a continuous process of him, taking up file after file, portfolio after portfolio. And it's not an exaggeration now to say that there's hardly any major important thing happening in the kingdom that this guy doesn't have a hand in. So it's been quite widely recognized that we were heading in this direction, but I think most people expected it to take a bit longer than it did. And so, when I woke up this morning and saw the news, I said, okay, it happened. We all knew it was going to happen. I just I wouldn't have guessed it would have happened this soon.
Is he a genuine moderniser, Mohammed bin Salman? I mean, he likes to sort of pose as a moderniser. He's posed for photographs of people like Mark Zuckerberg from Facebook. Sure. Is he the real deal?
Well, I guess it depends on how you define modernizer. I mean, this is somebody who is very committed to economic reforms. I think he's got a very ambitious social program. I mean, the social program, I think this is, excuse me, somebody from the younger generation that understands that a lot of the social restrictions inside the kingdom very much grate on young people, and that there are many, many young Saudis that wish that they could live a little bit more like they see their counterparts in other countries living and in other Arab countries. And so I think he understands that, and I think he has made progress on that front. On the economic front, I think Saudi Arabia has a lot of very, very large structural economic problems that they have to deal with. And he's he's put forth some proposals on how to do this. And now it's really just a question of waiting and seeing if they can actually work it out. I mean, you have the low oil price, which has taken huge amounts of money out of the state budget. You have a huge demographic imbalance with many, many young people who are entering the job market every year. And most of them, many of them are not able to find jobs. And so you really have to sort of remake the economy. They have to move away from dependence on oil. They have to find a way to employ all these young people. And in order to do that, you're going to have to create a new business culture that very much boosts the private sector and makes it less dependent on government funding. You also have to work on things like education so that young Saudis coming out of high school and coming out of university have the kinds of educations that are going to make them able to do different kinds of work than their parents did.
Yeah, no, you mentioned that. I mean, he's had a finger in every pie, more or less. I mean, one of those, of course, is the war in Yemen, which he's largely prosecuted. I mean, there's not been an unalloyed success, has it? And it seemed by many it's been behind the confrontation with Qatar.
Right. I mean, and I think I would say that the war in Yemen is definitely I think it's probably the most dangerous part of his legacy so far. I mean, it points to a level of foreign adventurism that I think makes many people in the region worried. I mean, Saudi Arabia throughout its history has spent tremendous amounts of money on its military, buys most of its hardware from the United States and from other countries, including Britain. It has a massive, massive military, but it's mostly chosen to keep things safe at home. It preferred historically to work through quiet diplomacy, through deal making, through consensus, through things like that. And so, people were pretty surprised that they decided to get involved in this war in Yemen. And here we are, more than 2 years into it. And Saudi Arabia doesn't have a lot to show for itself. It has made progress in some areas, but it's also widely accused of bombing civilian areas and destroying the Yemeni economy. And there doesn't appear to be any end in sight. Saudis have never explained to me how they see themselves getting out of this war in the near future. So, this comes back to Mohammed bin Salman because he's the defense minister. He's, at the end of the day, the one in charge of these policies. I think domestically he's been able to protect himself from some of this because inside of the kingdom, I think the royal family has tremendous control over the narrative that reaches its people. They have tremendous control over their media.
All right, Ben.
So it's not,
We've got to leave it there, I'm afraid. Thanks very much for joining me. Good to see you.
Thank you.
Good night.